So let me then just go through and review what is ahead of us today. The story I had as the top news was from COPAC 26, and the headline says, "A New Hope." In a surprise announcement, the US and China pledged to work together to slow down climate change. And since those are the number one and two countries that have created the climate change, I sure hope that they're able to figure out how to work together and do something about it. And in technology and EVs, Amazon's favorite electric vehicle company is now worth more than Ford or GM. This is Rivan, Rivan. They're not a big name, and they've only produced about 150 trucks so far, and they're worth more than either GM or Ford. Pretty amazing how this works. And then next is an article saying that wind and solar power could power the world's major countries most of the time. And I think that is encouraging. Then in our physics story for the day, this is a story about what actually is it that exists. And the idea that everything from spoons to stones is conscious is gaining academic credibility. In biology, the Earth's secret miracle workers is not a plant or an animal, it's fungi. In the brain, there is a new brain implant that turns thoughts into text. And the person who's their test subject has been able to think out 90 words per minute. So I think that's pretty amazing. And the last story, the medical story in Alzheimer's, and the headline is, "Has a treatment for Alzheimer's been sitting on pharmacy shelves for decades? Scientists have two possible candidates now for Alzheimer's treatment, and it's a combination of two drugs, both of which are over 50 years old. So there may have been important medications in the cabinet that we haven't used just because we were not aware of their benefits. Anyway, and I think that is particularly hopeful for kind of our age group. And so then let's start with the US and China pledge to work together. This was a surprise announcement, and the US and China said they'd work together to slow global warming during this next decade. And I have a statement from China's special climate envoy, Xi Zhenhua, who is so special that I never heard of him before. And he's saying wonderful things. One of the things he says is both sides recognize that there is a gap between the current efforts and the Paris Agreement goals. Yes, I would agree too. And he says further that we need to think big and be responsible. That is not the kind of statement I would expect to have from some government official. He says we need to actively address climate change and through cooperation, bring more benefit to our peoples and the people around the world. Those are wonderful words. What we haven't heard of is any specific agreements or cooperations that they're going to do while the two giants are cooperating, but at least they're talking about cooperation. And when it happened in the COP26, it was actually a fairly important moment because the conference was really falling apart, and it looked like no agreements, not even any inadequate agreements, would be reached. And having the US and China make this agreement then let it proceed forward. And we will see what benefits happen out of that conference. And certainly having the US and China at least talking about cooperating is a start. So what do you think?
They had their meeting already, a virtual meeting, Xi
Yes.
Jinping, and apparently, well, China is, I think they have a air pollution problem much worse than United States. So
Right, I think so too.
They would be interested.
Uh-huh. The meeting I heard was 4 hours, which is a pretty substantial meeting between guys at that level.
Yeah.
I think that may be longer than the meetings between our previous president and China in his entire term.
No doubt.
But you know, the reality of it is it's just talk, and talk is cheap. And the US has to get this through Congress, and the Republicans will block them. And China will say that they're working on it, but nothing will happen. They're burning more coal now in China than they burned 20 years ago, and still building new coal-fired power plants.
Well, they're busy building new renewable facilities as well.
Yeah.
So China has the problem after the pandemic is over, is people want to buy more plastic crap at Walmart. So we got to turn those factories back on.
Just the fact that the two leaders are talking is positive. So at least they have a better understanding of where they're standing.
Yes, I agree with you, Johannes. And I also certainly understand the perspective that talk is cheap and, you know, actions are what counts. I know when I try to figure out what somebody actually believes, what I do is pay attention to what they do, not what they say. Anyway, so we will see on that basis in the next couple of years what they believe.
Well, and we're likely in by 2030, the temperature is going to be probably 2 degrees higher, and we'll see that there isn't an awful lot that's changed in the world. Everything will be the same.
We'll see. We'll see. You certainly could be right. You know, the climate scientists are saying, continuing to say that it looks worse than they thought before.
But remember in 2000, Al Gore was saying that the North Pole would be ice-free by 2010 or something like that.
Well, he missed by a decade, huh? Okay, poor guy. No wonder he's not president. And also in something like 1868, a woman scientist said that this CO2 was going to cause us problems. She got no notice of her saying that until 4 years later, when a man stole her words and said the same thing and got famous. But that was 1868. So we've known about it for a while.
And how much has really been done about it?
Well, a lot. But whether what has been done works or not, we're only going to see. We'll see later. If there is a later, I think there'll be a later. Okay, to move on, next in EVs and technology, Rivian. You've all heard of Rivian, right? They went public last week, and when they went public, the stock ended up skyrocketing, and by the time that whole cycle was through, this company was valued as one of the world's most valuable automakers, worth billions more than either Ford or General Motors. And that might seem unusual because as of October, they'd only delivered 156 vehicles. So I guess those vehicles are worth a lot of money. And they are starting with 2 vehicles. The thing that they produced so far is their $73,000 pickup, which to me sounds like a little expensive for something you're going to use to carry boards and bricks around from the hardware store. And so it started to shipping. They're also going to have a 75,000 7-seat SUV that will be released next year, and it's designed as an off-road vehicle, so you can go through the mountains. I'm not sure where they're going to find the charging station at the top of the mountain, but that's another issue. Their timing also is very good, and I have noticed before in these kind of stock offerings that it is better to be lucky than to be good. And I think they have some luck going for them. This summer, Biden issued an executive order that called for EVs to account for half of all new auto sales in the US by 2030. So that's a lot of EVs, and somebody's got to make them. As Rivian is getting started, of course, they're facing challenges, one of which is the shortage of semiconductors. I guess that matters if you're making an electric vehicle. And the other thing is there still are limits in the number of charging stations. So people are afraid of getting an EV and not being able to charge it up when they're driving around. And the charging stations makes them think about it seriously, and they say the first priority really is making sure there are enough fast chargers available on highway rest stops so people can take the long trips that they like sometimes to take. And of course, like Tesla, Rivian is selling home chargers and developing their own nationwide charging networks. They plan to have 10,000 stations available by the end of 2023. So that's a fairly ambitious plan. And also, like Tesla, Rivian is taking an AI focus to its vehicles, and it has a hands-free semi-autonomous driving technology, which has caused a lawsuit from Tesla, who's accusing Rivian of stealing its trade secrets after hiring former employees. That's the regular kind of patent fight that you hear about in technology companies, because the technology workforce is a communal workforce. It's not a workforce that's dedicated to any particular company, and they move around when there are better offers. So that's happened to Tesla already, and it's being rated for employees. The big difference between Rivian and Tesla is the type of vehicles the two companies are selling. Rivian announced that its first model would be a pickup truck and then the SUV. Tesla has announced its pickup truck, the Cyber truck. It was announced in 2019, 2 years ago, but deliveries have not started yet. It looks like they'll start next year. And Rivian is also appealing to commercial clients, and Amazon is already committed to buying 100,000 of the Rivian delivery vehicles by 2030. So I think that's one of the reasons why the stock price was so high for Rivian. It also turns out Ford, you've heard of Ford, right? Ford has invested more than $500 million into Rivian. So I think they think there's something there. And then, the Biden has started to electrify the entire federal fleet of cars, SUVs, and trucks, which has more than 600,000 vehicles. So again, that's a lot of EVs that the government is buying. And they are pushing the Postal Service to purchase more than 150,000 electric delivery trucks. Of course, the current guy who's running the post office is not in favor of that. I guess he wants to use something else. In my fantasies, I imagine the Flintstones with their vehicle. We'll have that for our postal delivery truck. And Biden's infrastructure deal included $7.5 billion to build a new national network of electric vehicle chargers. So it looks like this is another sign that the transition to EVs is happening, and Wall Street thinks that it's the future of transportation. Otherwise, they would not have rated this company that has never produced much and valued it as one of the most valuable companies in the world. What do you think? Nobody's ready for you're muted, Johannes.
I'm on, but I think it's all a bunch of smoke and mirrors. And these IPOs are cleverly crafted by the underwriting Wall Street brokerage firms to generate hype and generate enthusiasm.
And generate money.
Yeah, and the idea that this company is worth more than Ford or GM is nonsense.
Well, the market, they say, values based on anticipation of future earnings, and they must be betting big on future earnings for this company.
Well, and we've all heard about bubbles, like
yes, we have
the dot-com bubble,
the tulip bubble.
Yes, and the housing financial crisis in 2008. I mean,
right.
I don't think anyone should bet the farm on Rivian.
Okay. I bet there are guys who said that about Tesla 5 years ago.
And Tesla isn't finished yet.
No.
Yeah. There's a lot of hype about these startups and stuff. And like you say, anticipated earnings. But what you have to look down the road is and imagine what the earnings will be 10 years from now.
Right. Well, it's not only earnings, it's market share. Because market share is what generates the financial momentum to generate earnings.
Well, I think General Motors will probably get back in the lead because they're coming up with a nice Hummer. Why a Hummer?
That's right. Well, GM
never
is
got
spending.
I never got Hummers, but I just knew they used a lot of gas. So now that this Hummer is going to probably use a lot of electricity.
Well, again, GM is betting big on EVs. Ford is betting big. I read with both companies about billion-dollar investments that they're making to move over their production. So we'll see.
Let's see who's going to come up with the let's say $35,000 decent car. That's
The heck
electric.
with the $35,000 car. I'm looking for the $9,999 car that does everything I need except when I'm driving to Alaska or something.
Well, maybe China will come up with that.
Well, I think so.
And then we'll all be so furious at China.
That's right. Well, I'm sure we're already planning to be furious at it. It is kind of my expectation, actually, that you're going to find the real leaders in this industry 10 years from now will be companies that nobody has heard about. Because with EVs, it's a lot easier to get in the business. And so there are a lot of aggressive guys with money who, want to make more money.
Who's going to come up with the idea of maybe like taking a car that you have and making it electric? Wouldn't that be interesting?
I don't know. It's a little bit of a tricky problem. Well, let's just throw away the motor and throw away the transmission and throw away the suspension.
And just get a plug.
Look at all the extra storage space you'd have.
Yes.
Right. Extra. You'll have a front trunk and a back trunk.
I think it's going to cost too much to do that, unfortunately.
Anyway, again, I think one of the things that really will accelerate it is when they start making inexpensive town cars.
Yeah.
Because that's what most people need. If they need a car at all. The idea with this ride hailing and the self-driving EVs is that you can just dial it up on the iPhone and it'll drive itself to your house. And in 10 minutes later, you'll have your car for you to drive. And when you can do that, why in the world would you own a car?
Yeah. I have a friend whose car was just totaled and she ran out of money for a rental car, and she's just gonna use a zip car. So she needs to go shopping. We should all sort of figure out how often are we really using our cars.
Right.
And maybe
And
invest
I
in
think
like a zip car business.
Yes, again, that's a sign of the kind of changes that are coming.
Nobody has mentioned Nissan, who makes EVs. And I'm driving a Nissan Leaf that cost about $13,000. It's from 2016, and it's great. I get about 95 mile range, and that's plenty.
Say it again. How much of a range?
95 miles.
Okay.
And the nice thing about it, if you drive it in cities, when you brake, it actually charges the battery again. So the range is much more than they advertised.
Oh.
And,
Come
and
home
I,
with more miles than when you left.
Yeah.
and are you able to charge it up at home? You know,
Right.
overnight?
We
Yeah.
do that overnight and it's charged next morning.
It's great for running around that town.
I
you know.
bet,
Mhm.
yeah.
Perfect.
So
There
you
was a-
guys are a sign of the future.
Yeah, well, we have another car in the garage too for long trips,
Okay,
but it's old.
it's old.
It's the
And
one that would like
is
to
it paid for?
refurbish. Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so
both
it's old and paid for. That's good. You're not very good consumers though.
No.
I know.
Okay, so next let's see what kind of reaction we can get to this story. Uh, uh, Careful study was made by researchers at University of California, Irvine. And one of the things that people have doubted about renewable power is how can you make a power system that always is dependable to have power when you need it, when your sources of power, uh, turbines and solar cells, only work under the right conditions. So you have intermittent power sources. And how do you put a bunch of intermittent power sources together and make reliable power? So that was the basis for the study. And what these guys did to try to understand what was happening is they took 39 years worth of hourly energy demand data from 42 major countries and then tried to look at that in terms of renewables ability to be able to support it. And what they found was in the electricity demand in advanced industrialized nations can be largely met by some combination of wind and solar power, but still you're going to need something extra to make sure the power is always there. And these reliable systems, they say, are capable of meeting electricity requirements in the countries that they studied, ranging from 72 to 91% of the time without any kind of energy storage. And if they had 12 hours worth of energy storage, they could satisfy demand 83 to 94%. That's still not 100%, and you need a system that can support 100%. So they're still, whatever they're doing, they're saying you still need to have auxiliary power to be able to cover the shortfall in the periods where there's not enough coming from the system. And so they found in the US that a wind and solar power system could provide about 85% of the total electricity demand in the US. They said also it'll be hard to completely eliminate fossil fuel for our power generation mix because basically that's what we have to use to cover the shortfall. Now, I want to also cover this. I got an email from Pete Soderman, and he says that the hot science thing I sent out is misleading because electricity is only 20% of the total energy system, and the other 80% comes from some form of fossil fuel. And there are a lot of electrical industrial processes that are hard to electrify, and so you can't convert them to electricity. And he says, quote, "The fact is," and I'm not sure of these facts myself, studying it every week as I do. He says the fact is that the resources to build turbines and cells doesn't exist any more than the fossil energy necessary to extract, process, manufacture, transport, or deploy them. And he thinks I ought to change my comment about the story. And so I did do a little bit of looking to see what I could find to support him. This is something here. Let me share the screen. I didn't do this correctly. I wish I knew how to do what I was doing sometimes. Okay, here we are. Here is a chart that shows power usage by energy source. And like Pete said, electricity is only about 20% of the total mix. And over here in the upper right, you see of the electricity, 61.3% of that electricity is currently being generated by fossil fuels. It's that 63% that is the first target for the renewable power, because we want to make the power that's generated to generate this electricity, we want to make it using something besides fossil fuels. So certainly that is a part of the issue. Now, another part that wasn't really considered in what Pete said is, of all this energy that we have, if you look at how it's used, about 20% is residential, almost 20% is commercial. These are both things that we should be able to power by electricity that is renewable when we're through. Then there's 28% transportation, and that presently the fuel for that would show in this previous chart with oil, and that is in the middle of being electrified. And there's a significant component of the transportation. This is the energy used in transportation. At least this 53% that is light duty vehicles, those are cars and light trucks. Those can all be electrified, and that is reducing the global oil use and increasing the electricity use, because electricity has to be generated to be able to provide that power. There's another 17% that is trucks, and those trucks will end up being converted. It looks like long range trucks may end up running on hydrogen. That looks like that has good energy density and do it. Buses can be electrified. Rail, there's some electrification going on. There's some tests for hydrogen trains. And it's still only 3%, whatever it is. Marine is going to be hard because it's they're going to have to figure out how to be able to push a ship across the ocean. I suspect that hydrogen may end up being used in these long-range marine applications. I haven't heard of really what they're doing beyond beginning electrification. China has the first electric freight ship that I have heard of, and it's being used to transport coal, of course. And aviation is 10% of the transportation. And aviation, I think the short and midterm aviation will end up going electric. There's no reason that couldn't be, and that's already, that part of the transition is already underway. The long range, I think, will end up going to hydrogen, and they're already, Airbus has already have tests of that going on. So it looks like when you come through and look at that, then one of the things you'll see when you look at this 10 or 20 years down the road is the electricity segment is going to be very much bigger and mostly powered, 85% anyway, powered by renewables. And I suspect the electricity will increase from a 20% power to 40 or 50%. If you look at this oil and figure how much of the transportation is being powered by that oil that's going to go electric or hydrogen, then the oil is going to be way down as you get a number of years out. That's why they're saying the oil makers are going to have more than $10 trillion worth of assets that they're not going to be able to capitalize. So that's a little bit of the background beyond the article and some of the stuff that deals with Pete's commentary. The other concern he had that he said was going to make this not possible is there's not enough material. If you look in the case of lithium, already the existing supplies of lithium are enough to last us for a decade, and they're sure that there is a lot more lithium that will be available. They just need to get those things developed. And of course, the battery manufacturers are busy trying to figure out how to drastically reduce the use of lithium. As we reported a week or 2 weeks ago, one new material that they're finding that is very effective for electrolytes is something that comes from trees. And the last I looked, I thought trees were a renewable resource. The other issue is there also are these rare earths. And one of the things that I reported on here also was development where they're able to economically extract rare earth from garbage. And the thing I know is we have lots of garbage. So we have an endless supply of garbage. So I think we're not going to run out of the rare earths that we need in our motors for the EVs or the turbines for the wind turbines. So that's what I got. What do you guys think?
First of all, the data you were showing, some of those curves were from 2011. What would be interesting is to see the rate of change. And just another thing, you mentioned garbage. I know that in Denmark, they burn garbage and use that to heat homes, and they clean the smoke before it gets out into the environment. And finally, about the marine use, the world's largest company, Maersk, already has, I think it's 6 of the big ships that are running on clean energy.
Wow.
So
what are they running the ships on? Do you know, Johannes? Is it batteries or hydrogen?
I think it might be hydrogen, but not batteries.
Okay.
Look it up again.
Okay.
So rate of change, where we're going, not where we were a couple of years ago. And I think it's moving in the right direction.
Well, one of the things I think that you spoke to, Johannes, that is very difficult to deal with these forecasts is that we're still talking about these new technological developments that now have shown to have very fast rates of change and adoption. And so things can change faster than anyone realizes they can. And I know because of these weekly sessions that we have, that in every area we talked about, there are wonderful new technologies being developed, some of which are ready to reach market. So there's so much change coming ahead of us that I think no one is able to predict it.
It seems to me, I read somewhere that if you could electrify all the households, the homes in general, that would about 85%. This number I remember of all electricity is being used. Do you remember?
Oh, the
Reading
number
anything?
was if you electrify the rooftops of half of the houses, you have all the power you need for the world.
I was just thinking, that should be an easy thing for the simple reason that, I for instance have solar, and because of that, a neighbor has solar, and across the street there are three people. It's infectious, but also, I've had it now for since 2005, I would say. Anyhow, it's paid for itself already several times over. It's a lot cheaper than the electricity that you get from the company online.
Uh-huh.
And I think just that alone, if that becomes widely known and understood, then I think the conversion to solar panels is going to be very rapid.
Uh-huh. Now, the other thing that's happening with solar power, thank you for that, John. With solar power, one of the changes that is in the process is how we make solar panels. And you've heard me talking about Periscovite solar panels, ones that are made that have some different crystalline structure and are as efficient as the silicon solar panels. One of the things that you probably don't realize about these periscovites is the way they make them is with a fluid bath. So they dip something in a solution, and the solution, as it makes a film, as you dry it out, organizes itself in the correct physical patterns, and you end up with a solar cell that is much easier to make and uses fewer materials than the existing technology. And when it's easier to make and uses fewer materials, the price comes down because the cost comes down. So we are in the beginning of yet another revolution in terms of how we actually make these panels.
Yeah.
One of the things about energy use is about 65% of the actual energy we consume is rejected as waste heat. And like Johanna says, in Denmark, they have district heating systems where the waste heat is piped around and used for domestic heating.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if I'm going to try and share this.
Let me give you the rights to do that then,
okay.
Andrew. So I've got to make you a co-host, and now you can share.
Okay. I'm hoping that this.
There's a green button at the bottom of the screen that share. Something's happening. Okay. Hey, a spaghetti chart.
They're actually called a Sankey diagram after the fellow who originally conceived them.
Yes, I've seen these before.
But it shows the sources of energy on the left-hand column here, and then the usage in the middle. And then here is the actual energy that was actually used.
That's great. That's a great chart.
And these are generally available anywhere on the internet. You can find them. This one is 2017, so it's a little bit out of date, but
It's
it-
still got, it's in the right order of magnitude, so
yeah.
that's great.
But the interesting thing is how it shows like a petroleum down here is mainly going into transportation and industrial.
Which is, and mainly into transportation, and that's
Yeah.
the stuff that I was talking about. The industrial is still harder to get.
Yeah.
To electrify.
But anyone who would like to better understand where the energy comes from and where it goes, these charts are a useful thing to
Yes,
use.
absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay.
And from Lawrence Labs means that there's been a lot of intellectual effort put into it.
Yeah, it's credible.
Yep. Thank you. So the changes are going to be coming. And the thing is that all we don't know is how much, how fast, or what impact it's going to have on society or our life. But other than that, it's all good, I guess. Okay, now,
Just one comment.
yes, sir.
I just saw that Maersk, the container company, they're using green methanol
Okay.
to power the ships. And I don't know how green
Oh,
that
it's
is.
green. Methanol, there are ways to make methanol from CO2 or things like that. And I suspect it's something like that is what they mean by green methanol. And I would personally prefer when they're able to use green hydrogen, but I think they probably don't have the production up high enough now of that. But it shows what they're doing. That's great.
Green methanol is made from corn. It's just
Really?
alcohol. It's just alcohol.
Okay.
It's fermented.
Okay. You're right. Okay.
And
Okay.
there's a lot of criticism of it because it takes almost as much energy to grow the corn as you get from the methanol. So
Right. Now, one of the things you need to do, and your beautiful chart didn't do this, is you need to look at each of these things in terms of the net efficiency. And the first thing you need to do is to see if your solution actually produces a net positive effect after you have considered everything that went into the solution. And you're saying green methanol, if it's positive, is only a little bit positive.
that's right. The other thing
Okay.
that chart does not show is the energy content of imported goods. And a lot of industrial jobs in the US have been exported to
Right.
Asia. And so a lot of the energy that goes into producing those imports doesn't show up on an American energy consumption chart.
But except it might show, if you have an international chart, it would show up in transportation.
Yes, and ideally we'd have a world chart for
Right.
this
Yep.
that would show the whole thing.
Yeah, all we need to do is know what's going on in the world. Okay, thank you, Andrew. And I really appreciated your chart. One of the things I love about these sessions is that you guys all know so much and can contribute a lot to our discussion. So thank you.
Would you like me to send you the link?
Yes, I would. I'll keep that in the file. Thank you.
Okay.
So the next story is perhaps more troubling to some, and all it is about is what is the nature of the universe. So I like to cover big stories, and I think what is the nature of the universe is a pretty big story. And here is a view, quote, consciousness permeates reality rather than being just a unique feature of human subjective experience. It's the foundation of the universe, present in every particle and all physical matter. And that's basically the idea of panpsychism. And this is a way to try to explain consciousness, because the scientists who are studying consciousness can't figure out what it is or where it comes from or how to make it or anything like this. And so this panpsychist view is increasingly now being taken seriously by credible philosophers, neuroscientists, and physicists. It's not just crazy wacko people like me who think this. And the discussion really was moved forward a few years ago by David Chalmers, who you may have heard of, and he's a philosophy of mind professor at New York University. And he, in 1995, laid out what he called the hard problem of consciousness, which was demonstrating that there was still no answer to the question of what causes consciousness. Traditionally, one of the dominant perspectives is materialism, and it's provided the basic framework that science is mainly using to try to solve the problem. It leads, though, to intractable complications. The problem with the materialist viewpoint, it states that consciousness is derived entirely from physical matter. It's unclear, though, exactly how that works. And Chalmers says it's very hard to get consciousness out of non-consciousness. How do you make a rock conscious? And Chalmers says physics is just structure. It can explain biology, but there's a gap, consciousness, which it cannot explain. And panpsychism offers an attractive alternate solution, saying consciousness is a fundamental feature of physical matter. And specifically, one view of it says is that every single particle in existence has some simple form of consciousness, and you put a bunch of particles together and they can make more complicated consciousnesses somehow. And a more complicated version of that is humans. Now, there have been credible theorists, thinkers who've been saying stuff like this really for about 100 years, dating back to the philosopher Bertrand Russell and the physicist Arthur Eddington, who made a serious case about this about 100 years ago, but it really has been left by the wayside. And now people who are studying it say that, quote, it's silly to suppose that underlying nature has nothing to do with consciousness, and then to wonder, where does consciousness come from? So there are different viewpoints. An alternate psychic perspective holds that the universe as a whole is conscious and not just the individual parts. It's the universe that is conscious. And then this kind of reflects a different perspective that is a top-down creation where every individual thing is derived from the universe rather than a bottom-up version where objects are built from up from the smallest particles. And the guys that are supporting this idea talk about quantum entanglement and say that this suggests that the universe functions as a fundamental whole rather than a collection of discrete parts. Now, if the psychic pan physicist, I can't figure out the word, is incredible, then there also is even a more extreme viewpoint, and the more extreme viewpoint is the idealist viewpoint. Remember Plato? And idealism holds that physical matter does not exist at all, and conscious experience is the only thing there is. And from that viewpoint, panpsychism is a moderate perspective. So in conclusion, I'll quote from philosopher John Perry, who says, if you think about consciousness long enough, you either become a panpsychist or you go into administration. So what do you think? Do you think? Who is thinking what? I don't know even what to ask.
There's a third possibility, and that is that you become unconscious. I don't know. I think this is sort of reaching, the consciousness. I think it's just a name for a condition. And
well, that would be a materialist, because the condition comes about because of some arrangement of stuff. So you're a materialist.
No, not necessarily. I mean, you're also conscious of behavior, of others and of yourself, for that matter, and all of that in order to the fact that we can realize it means that we're conscious, and if we're not, and we just wasn't really kidding, if we're not conscious, well, we're not there. We're unconscious in the first place, and if we don't get out of that, well, then it's curtain.
Now, I have to say, for at least the last 30 years, that what I have come to understand from teaching and from personal experience is that, what is real and what always exists is consciousness, and that material things are always changing and they come and go. Consciousness doesn't come and go, though. Maybe mental awareness does, but the consciousness is always there. And for me, this is actually a real fundamental understanding of the way the world works and the way in which my own kind of being and consciousness work. So it's also, I have found talking about this to people is most people think I'm absolutely wacky to believe such crazy stuff.
Well, the second paragraph in the article is the correct one. All this stuff is just absolute bunkum. And the reality is consciousness is just evolutionary neurological ability to take these sensory inputs and experiences and create a mental image of what they represent. And you can figure it out, like different animals will have a different, each individual's consciousness is unique because their experience and sensory inputs, that their neurology build these images out of is unique. And similarly, animals that have different sensory abilities, they'll see the world in a different way, like a fly with its multiple eyes.
Sure.
It sees the world differently. Or if they detect infrared radiation or ultraviolet radiation, they see the world differently. So I think it's just pseudoscientific BS to imagine that every element in the universe contains consciousness.
Anyway, that's been one of the problems they've had. The problem they've had with the realist viewpoints that you say is that no one who has the realist viewpoint has actually been able to provide any kind of coherent explanation of how you make something conscious out of a bunch of unconscious stuff. So, you know, here, while it's something that I kind of believe myself, it also, you know, these are serious people who are thinking about it and who aren't sure what the answer is. You know, certainly our senses tell us one thing, but our senses are still interpreted by the mind. What lights up the mind? Does the mind provide its own consciousness? That's what the materialist would say. And the pan-psychic or the idealist would say the consciousness is there from the universe. And it's like the brain is some snazzy receiver. Anyway,
And
so
if the consciousness was from the universe, you'd think we'd all be seeing it the same way. But each of us has our own unique consciousness, so that suggests that it's created in our own heads rather than externally.
anyway, I certainly, again, I've heard those arguments.
I think if you go back 100 years, and if you were talking with somebody, if you could go back in time, and you tell them what is happening now, they would also be very, very skeptical.
Right.
So I think we need to keep an open mind.
Okay, and now while we're having such an open mind, let's talk about one of the orders of life that this article calls the Earth's secret miracle worker. And it turns out it is, you guessed it, it's fungus. And the article starts with, just imagine having a dinner with your family or friends, and you're enjoying beer and a wine and maybe a basket of bread and vegetables sauteed with soy sauce. And after dinner, you have some chocolate and maybe some sake. And they say after this dinner, you really have to stop and thank fungi for all of this. It turns out fungi are responsible for much of our food production and much of our processed material. And there have also been a number of important medical breakthroughs like penicillin. And fungus also sequesters and slowly releases carbon. And when most people think about fungus, they associate it with decay. And many people mistakenly think that fungus are plants. However, fungi are neither plants nor animals, but rather they're organisms that have their own kingdom of life. The way they feed themselves, for example, is different. They don't photosynthesize like plants, neither do they ingest and digest their food like animals. Fungi actually live inside their food and secrete enzymes to dissolve the nutrients they need. Included in this kingdom are things like yeast and mold and mushroom and different kinds of unicellular and multicellular organisms that live in the ocean and freshwater and deserts and young ecosystems and old ecosystems. Also, if you look into the detail of our microbiome, you'd see that one of the components in this symbiotic organism or combination of organisms that live in our stomach includes fungi. So they're important in each of our bodies as well. And it turns out fungi are most closely related to animals than to plants. They have a common ancestor with animals. And most plants can't live outside water and rely on fungi to survive, to help them get the water they need. There would be no forests or no agriculture without fungi. Herbivores such as cows can't break down grass without the fungi in their gut. Fermentation to make beer or wine is possible only because of yeast. And so no fungi would mean no bread or chocolate or soy sauce or beer or wine. We've also discovered medicines in fungi like cholesterol lowering statins and penicillin and medicines that allow for organ transplants. And also, fungi have been involved in traditional ways of ritually reaching the celestial form from the body form. These include fungi, including the soma in the Vedic rituals and communion with bread and wine in the Roman Catholics, and things like psychedelic psilocybin mushrooms in cultures that are around places that have cows, because psilocybin mushrooms grow on cow plops in the right environment. So any place you find cow, you're going to find psilocybin mushrooms. And where you find the mushrooms, there are people taking the mushrooms to experience God directly, whether their God was materially formed or just a part of the universe. And anyway, these people say the time has really come to leave mycological illiteracy behind. And it turns out there is no regeneration without degeneration. Energy is not lost, it's transformed. And in our ecosystems, it is fungi that are mainly responsible for this transformation of dead matter. The scientists, the mycologists say that we only know about 10% of the species of fungus on the planet. And considering all the things they do for us, maybe it would be good for us to know more. So what do you think about fungus?
Well, I think that just about everything that we know and see and whatever, when you start to analyze every material, whether it's living or so-called dead, it's all made up of ever smaller particles. One of the things that I got a grandson, who I never talked with, but when I did, was involved in taking apart cells, human cells, with the idea of discovering where the cancer originates. And I never thought, I thought a cell was just the smallest part of our being or anything being, but turns out that they again can be subdivided in smaller and smaller particles. And I think if we have the equipment, I wouldn't at all be surprised that there's virtually no end to that until we just discover where actually life happens.
Okay, it's getting late. Let me continue to move along if I may.
Sure.
The next story was about a new brain implant that turns thoughts into text. And here, Stanford scientists have developed a brain implant that allows a man with paralyzed hands to brain type up to 90 characters per minute by just thinking about the words. What they actually do is rely on the subject to imagine writing a word with his hands, and then the AI decodes the neural signals in his brain, not in his hand since it's paralyzed, and then displays the word on the screen. The system has a 99% accuracy rate, and the man is now the world's fastest mind typist. And the researchers who are doing this say that this is just the tip of the iceberg. When we really understand the brain through neuroscience in the coming decades, we should be able to do much better in a wide variety of tasks. The biggest challenge, they say now, is in commercialization. They have to figure out some better way to do it than Elon Musk's Neuralink can do it, where you have to have electrode sensors implanted into your brain. I would say having sensors embedded in my brain is something that there'd be a little, I would have reluctance to do. I also bet it's expensive. And so what they're madly trying to develop is different kind of caps that you can put on that will be effective enough to sense the brain. But the people who are working on it say this is really exciting technology, and the example of being able to give a paralyzed person the ability to write fairly speedily is the signs of some of the benefits that it'll bring.
This would be so tremendous for any of those ALS patients.
Oh,
because their
yes.
cognition is perfect and they're just locked in.
Yes,
You
you're
know?
absolutely right.
Wonderful, wonderful.
And can you imagine what it's like to be able to be in the world again after just being locked in your brain?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I worked with the group in Wadsworth Lab here in Albany, and they were working on what did they had electrodes on the head, and they were trying to just by using a thought, they were all they were using was like some kind of a game,
right?
Hitting
playing pong, brain pong.
Close. They were getting close. So I
Uh-huh.
can see this. Wow, very good.
Yes.
Be excellent.
I think the accuracy rate is incredible. I mean, 99% accuracy for what the subject is thinking, concentrating on. I mean, that's better than spell check guesses.
That's better than my typing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's faster than my typing. It makes me want to get one.
No, I wonder though, if you would have these implants and you can activate that, and you're trying to to actually say something, something intelligent, and I know that I was in marketing for a little while. That's my specialty, and I know that when you want to say something that really makes sense, I know for myself anyway, I have to edit and re-edit and re-edit till I got it just right. How would you do that? Would the thing just scratch out the words that you re-edit or something?
Well, I'm sure that's one of the things that they will figure out how to do is
Yeah.
you're certainly right. If you're writing there as a part of communication, which is just real time between the two of us, and there's another part of it, which is developing how you want to say to make it the most effective. And that requires the ability to rewrite and edit. So maybe that'll be Rev 2.
I just wonder if this person who types all this, if you add optical character recognition, so it's almost like he could speak.
Oh, right. I was thinking of it like that is a text to speech component where he could write it out and then speak, and they have to do better than the robot voices that we know about.
I think he can already speak. It's just that he couldn't use his hand.
Okay.
But another ALS application, you would think they could use this to trigger your diaphragm muscles so that an ALS person could breathe better. Because
Wow, good idea.
the thing that kills the ALS people is they lose the ability to actuate their lungs.
Okay. You're showing wonderful potential with this kind of technology. I hope the brain scientists have heard of it.
I'm sure they're all listening, and there
They
must
should be listening. They should be listening to your show.
probably the realities are it's not as easy as it might seem.
Oh, I bet this is stuff these guys have been working on for a decade, I'm sure. And one of the things that makes it possible is the advances they have in AI, because the writing system there is integrated with AI, and that's why it gives this 99% accuracy rate. It actually has what I've always wanted. I've always told my wife that I wanted not spell check, but I wanted think check. Maybe this could do it. Okay, last story. And the last story is for everyone who has fears of Alzheimer's or is caring for Alzheimer's or has a friend with Alzheimer's. And there are two drugs that were approved more than 50 years ago that look like they not only counteract brain damage caused by Alzheimer's, but cause the problem to start healing itself. Right now, these are just animal studies, and the results, they say, are explosive. They're so significant. And so these two drugs are Gemfibrocell, which is an old cholesterol lowering drug, and retinoic acid, which is a vitamin A derivative. And that what they have found is using low doses of these together have a robust impact on the brain, and it looks like they will be thrust into the role of curing or fighting what is presently an incurable brain disorder, which is Alzheimer's. And both medicines zero in on the brain's astrocytes, which are cells intimately involved in this key process that progressively destroys the brain. And so these astrocytes, it looks like they're responsible for the accumulation of the amyloid beta, the plaque that gums up the brain and is one of the characteristics of Alzheimer's. And what they found is used in combination, these force the astrocytes to reverse their destructiveness, and instead of creating more of this amyloid plaque, it reduces the amyloid plaque that is already in the brain, and this improves the cognitive function. And so it looks like there is a treatment coming. They understand the mechanism that is behind the treatment and why it is effective. And they don't know when this is going to progress to full-blown human trials. But for me, if I had a wife or a relative with Alzheimer's, I would sure be thinking about, should I be giving this to my wife? Nothing else helps. Maybe this will. So what do you folks think?
I think it would be wonderful if this can progress to where it can be used. It would help so many people. The burden of caring for somebody with Alzheimer's on the family or friends is incredible.
Yes. Certainly, I know much emotional pain that comes from Alzheimer's. I think that's why they call Alzheimer's the slow death.
Yeah.
So maybe they're, yes.
You see,
Oh, go ahead.
go ahead.
We don't know the combination, do we? I mean, if we were
We
gonna-
don't know the dosage.
Yeah, so I hope it would be nice if they would sort of figure that out fast.
They would
So
like
we
to.
can
They
make it
say low
count.
doses, so you could start it again. If I had somebody in this condition and felt the desperation that I know some of my friends have felt, it would sure make me interested in experimenting, even if I didn't know what the hell I was doing.
Mm.
You know, if nothing is helping them, then this won't make it worse, I would guess. That's probably a foolish attitude, but it's a desperate situation.
Mhm.
I wonder if Alzheimer's is actually essentially a diet-related problem that some people are more, they're eating all their life processed foods and things of that sort, and are very low on their real vitamin intakes, or they get it in artificial forms. And eventually they starve themselves in certain areas, and it affects the brain.
Maybe it's caused by electricity.
It's
How do
caused
you
by,
mean that?
Well, in the old days, people didn't get Alzheimer's, but we've only had electricity for the last 120 years. And now we-
Okay. It may be in the old day, people didn't live long enough to get it, but
Well, in the old days, the cure for Alzheimer's was pneumonia. And people died from pneumonia before they were 75 years old.
okay. So there's hope, huh? We just have to
Wow.
reintroduce pneumonia.
It's a choice.
Yeah. The choice is you can live longer, but you're taking the risk that you'll be killed by Alzheimer's instead of a school bus or something like
Sure,
that.
sure.
Somebody's gonna kill you anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, I think it is promising that they're finding something. Again, they say there are no treatments for Alzheimer's, and certainly that's what I see going through the reading that I do. And it is immensely promising. This is another thing I want them to get to the human trials starting, say, tomorrow.
Mhm. Yeah.
And there have been lots of progress in medical treatments. Like for years and years, people thought ulcers were just a condition and it was treated with antacids. And
Right,
it
right.
took that guy in Australia had to fight the medical profession for 20 years to get them to recognize that it was a bacterial problem.
Right. Anyway, thank you all, and we will see you all in another week. It was a good session, and thank you for joining us.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
And when you talk with Fred, tell him we miss him.